Rich mnisi.
This was 2,000 Rand.
Rich mnisi is not targeting you, my friend, because
you're paying a premium price for a premium product.
Rich mnisi definitely falls under luxuries.
You need millions just to visit the website.
Because I had seen it on all the influencers, like
okay, maybe saying you're not the target market for the 80th time is dismissive. There should always be room for criticism. Would this energy be better spent asking why one company gets to charge $1.4 million for a handbag because a dead white woman was once considered iconic? Perhaps the issue is the commodification of heritage and culture. But doesn't everyone do that all the time? Could it be tribalism? I try to remind myself that I should be cleaning my room or feeding the cat, maybe thinking about the fact that people are dying, Kim. But still, I couldn't help but wonder, why is Rich mnisi so expensive?
So the most obvious answer is that Rich mnisi is a luxury brand, and what is the main characteristic of a luxury brand? It's expensive. And the idea behind why luxury fashion is so expensive, because it's not just expensive, it's expensive. And the reason for that, or the idea that was sold, is that it's because luxury clothing is of the highest quality. You know, like the raw materials are either really rare or they're very difficult to obtain. There's a lot of research and development that goes into the product. The construction techniques are really refined, or they draw on like hundreds of years of practice. The laborers not only dedicate a lot of time and like effort to the products, but they're also paid well for all the time they spend on it. And sometimes it can also be as arbitrary as that the brand has been around since 1854, and that's a big deal. But this doesn't change the fact that like fashion really isn't the business of innovation, and it takes the same amount of skills, materials, and time for Valentino and Zara to produce a t-shirt. But the only difference is that one of those brands gets to charge 20,000 Rand for it. So clearly, it's not just the cost of materials and the cost of labor and, you know, the supposed superior quality of a product that makes luxury fashion so expensive. Well, that's not the entire reason. A big part of why luxury fashion is so expensive is simply just because it can. You know, it comes in a limited amount, and it comes at such a high price point that you have to be part of a very small elite group of people to have access to that. And if you are one of the very few people who can get access to this product, then that automatically sort of tells everyone else that you're special or that you're important. Obviously, in our society, the more wealth and prestige you have, the more powerful you are. You know, what makes luxury fashion so desirable is that when something costs a lot more, we believe it has more value. And when we think something has more value, we think it's going to give us more value. There was an experiment when people were given 2 glasses of wine to taste, and they were told the one glass of wine was like $1,000 and the other one was $9. And all of them, well, the majority of the people in the study had said that the $1,000 glass of wine just tasted better and it felt smoother. Meanwhile, the whole time it was the same glass of wine. But just that concept, just the idea of something costing more just already made them assign all this value and like merit to something. And I find a lot of this interesting because when Rich mnisi is now attaching these really high prices to his offering, shouldn't that also sort of signal to our brains that once again, here is an expensive product, so that means it's special, that means it's meaningful, and that it has power? Yet, when Rich mnisi, just like most South African or black designers in general, dare to retail their products at these luxury prices, there's always a bit of pushback. Like the same people who never seem to have an issue with why a Saint Laurent belt is 30,000 Rand don't think a young black person should dare to charge 2,000 Rand for a jersey. And I'm wondering if perhaps it's because for most people, the idea of African luxury is an oxymoron. Like our perceptions of Africa are so linked to like internalized racism, poverty, and violence that it's also in direct opposition to what we think of when we think of luxury, which is like beauty, worth, and even to an extent freedom. Like that's too much of a clash in people's heads that they're like, it's wrong. Of course, I think in recent years, we are sort of moving past this sort of pushback against expensive or luxury African products. And I think a lot more people are starting to see that like African product, African design is worthy of being luxurious. I mean, we've got the success of like Tebe, Laduma, and even Rich. I mean, I think about how even like last year during the winter, my entire Instagram feed was just those like jerseys Rich did in collaboration with Johnny Walker, which again is also kind of a bit of a luxury premium alcohol brand. You know, but anyways, the main reason for this discussion or this video is the inciting incident that had happened. I think maybe it's like 4 weeks ago now. I'm so late doing this. I was supposed to do this like so long ago. But yeah, the inciting incident, which was the 60,000 Rand xibelani. The first reaction to everyone's just absolute like shock and horror at the price was to like want to defend it, because one, I work with like a lot of yarn and wool, so I do know how expensive that is already. And you know, my mom's side of the family is Zonga, so I also know that like making a xibelani is not like, it's not 2 minutes of work, you know what I mean? And I would like to assume that because Rich produces locally, he is at least paying all of his like factory work or the sewists a decent wage. And I do think people should also be paid for their cultural heritage and their knowledge. And add to that the skirt is also made from merino wool, which is an incredibly expensive wool fiber. In fact, it is also one of the most expensive in the world, which we're really like famous for producing in South Africa, which I thought, you know, that's another check again to the product. And it also features napa leather, again, also really expensive. And you know, then there's also still your other costs of running a business, you know what I mean? You've got to pay rent, and you've got to pay salaries, and you've got to shoot the product, you got to pay a photographer, you got to pay the post-production team, you have to pay the models. I know a lot of y'all don't like doing that. You know what I mean? So I can understand how something would get expensive already. And I know that I've already sort of established that luxury products aren't only expensive because of the input costs. But I do feel like people always like to forget that when they're talking about like South African products, because it's not cheap to make stuff. Yeah, we don't live in China or Bangladesh or other places with very lax labor laws, or where it's easy to like get materials and products for cheap. But at the same time, 60,000 Rand is still really steep, and I don't not think that doesn't deserve a discussion. But then that brings me to how I have a couple of issues with how I feel like some of the pushback and contention around this price tag stems from one of two reasons: colonialism. And well, like two different aspects of the legacy of colonialism in South Africa. So, because the first part, I think, of people's issue with the price is just like good old-fashioned tribalism. Yeah, it's just good old-fashioned tribalism. Like, it's not a secret that Tsonga people, and generally like a lot of the ethnic groups from Limpopo, receive a lot of discrimination and violence because of their ethnicity and the legacy of apartheid, where there's even a hierarchy within black people, the most subjugated people, of which tribes are better or more superior. And you know, that has left Tsonga, Pedi people, Venda people at the bottom of the ring of stuff. There's also like aspects of colorism and featureism that come into play with this tribalism as well, just generally because most Limpopo people are darker skinned and we have like wider noses and etc. And you know, these are the least desirable traits in our Western society and our Western beauty ideals. And I know you might want to bring up Shoma Josie as an example of how the tribalism chat isn't as relevant as it used to be. But like someone like Shoma Josie does enjoy a lot of success and fame, mostly because she is a conventionally attractive light-skinned woman. And I don't imagine that a darker skinned, less conventionally attractive Tsonga woman would be able to have met John Cena or achieved a lot of the opportunities that Shoma Josie has, which definitely is not to say she doesn't deserve them or hasn't earned them, but for that one Tsonga woman to be celebrated and not discriminated against and not be on the butt end of some of the really gross jokes people make, has to do with the fact that she also has a lot of other privileges that sort of cancel that out. And I bring this up to mention that I think that a lot of people's issue with the 60,000 Rand xibelani, which is a very, very Tsonga item, it's a very big signifier of Tsonga culture, is that like they just inherently hold the belief that like nothing from Tonga people is of value because Tonga people themselves are not valuable. So to see that price tag feels like, you know, y'all trying it. And obviously, I'm not saying everyone who was angry about this was a tribalist or, you know, exhibiting internalized racism or anything. But I do feel like the legacy of apartheid and colonialism is very evident in some people's anger towards the 60,000 rand skirt. And then there's also another side to the issue, which I think is a bit more nuanced and I do think deserves a bit more conversation. And I sort of thought of it when I saw a lot of people who were defending Rich were speaking about how he was sort of like beating white people to the punch, you know, like sort of preventing Euro-American designers from appropriating from our cultures, which, you know, they've already mocked and demoralized since like forever, and then also like to turn around and then turn our artifacts and our silhouettes and our prints into really big bucks for themselves so they can seem edgy and cool once they've run out of ideas. And even if that is the case, like Rich is the one who is setting the terms of how an item from his culture is going to be presented and commodified. That 60,000 rand price point, some people have mentioned, also means that the majority of people from that culture cannot access it. Though I think that's a bit of like a moot point because number one, xibelani is already a commodity. It is something that's already bought and sold. So I don't think the anger can be over deciding to commodify like a cultural artifact. And then number two, it also comes at several different price points. Like some people in the anger were like, how can you charge 6,000 rand for something that I can get for 500 rand? So it's not like it was completely inaccessible or that we're running out of them or that he's excluding every Tonga person ever. It just means that he's created a more luxurious version of this product that is already in the market already, you know what I mean? And no one, like, he's not excluding Tonga people from anything, and I don't think it's sort of like a slap in the face to the people from the culture that he comes from either. So that brings me to how I want to speak about how with cultural appropriation, I think a lot of us get it very wrong because we have to remember that like cultural appropriation itself is not inherently good or bad. What gives it that moral judgment, what makes it, you know, damaging or I guess could be good is that context and like power dynamics matter. Cultural appropriation has been happening since the dawn of time. For as long as cultures meet each other, we all borrow things from each other. We pick up things from each other's languages. That's why so many like languages are similar. That's an example of cultural appropriation. Things like wars happen, and that's why a culture can enforce their beliefs and practices over another one. Like I eat pasta and I've worn a kilt, and that is cultural appropriation because I'm not Italian and I'm not Scottish. But we wouldn't really consider it the bad kind of cultural appropriation because I didn't create and or benefit from a system that oppresses Italian or Scottish people. Yet so when white people, and even to a smaller extent, other South African tribes wear a xibelani, we can actually discuss that as being the bad kind of cultural appropriation. Because, again, white people have created and benefit from the system of racism and white supremacy and all the other things that have oppressed Tonga people for decades. And at the same time, the legacy of colonialism has also created a hierarchy with South African ethnic groups that also mean that while it's not a lot of power and privilege, other tribes such as like Zulu people have more power over Tonga people. So we can sort of look at it, but not too long, as the bad kind of cultural appropriation. And obviously between white people and other South African tribes, one of them is much worse than the other, considering that they 100% created that system, and the other tribes might benefit a little bit, but not much, because at the end of the day, we're all black and we're all suffering. But I do think that is a bit more of an interesting conversation to have, and obviously it requires a bit more nuance and like complexity, and like there are no absolutes, but it's a bit more interesting than just being mad that Tonga people have luxury products, you know? And that also makes me think that maybe like the real issue that we should all actually have, like the thing we should actually be talking about, is the fact that we are participating in a fashion system that is so rooted in capitalism and the Western tradition. You know, like as I've mentioned, culture is this thing we've always shared and negotiated. And I think it's very wrong that in this Western context, it's perfectly normal for one person to decide that they are able to take or give a culture or pieces of a culture to anyone, and to decide that it's perfectly fine to take an item from a culture, which is something that we've all, by being participants in that culture, have had a hand in, and decide that you are essentially the creator of it, and that you get to attach this ridiculously high price through which other people can establish a sense of superiority and importance over other people by purchasing. Like, that the actual issue, I think, is maybe that like luxury fashion shouldn't exist, or the commodification of culture, especially the kind of commodification that excludes a large group of people. That shouldn't exist. Like, we shouldn't be doing that anyway. Like, maybe all culture should be free and it should all be equally shared, but that would also need for us to live in sort of a utopia where we all are at the same level of power and dignity and, you know, quality of life, which, you know, these are like my little socialist fantasies, and we're not going to get into that anyway, because the question still remains, why is Rich mnisi so expensive? So we've already concluded that, you know, luxury things are expensive to make. Cool. Number two, you know, there's an inherent like value we associate when things are expensive. Number three, we live in a country with quite a small market share, so it already makes sense to sell things at a higher price to a smaller group of people just in order to cut costs and earn a livable like wage. And number four, I think it's also just important that we realize that there is value and there is quality and there is prestige. There is a general sense of luxuriousness in something made in South Africa by South Africans. Our processes and our cultures deserve to be just as sought after and highly valued as the people who have spent years robbing us and the planet for their culture and processes. You know? And also maybe the reason why Rich mnisi is expensive is because of this, like because of me making this video right now, because of the hundreds of tweets, the outrage, the articles, the impassioned offenses. Like, look at how much like publicity and earned media value and clout all of this has generated. Maybe Rich mnisi is just expensive because it has to be, because it's provocative. And it's exactly what gets people going. And for that, I have mad respect. Yeah. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. And I know this is also like, I wrote all of this like 3 weeks ago, and I'm so over myself doing it now. And I'm gonna now go take a shower and continue bleeding into my bed. Bye.